My guest today, Asif Hasan Zeeshan, is an architect and founder of Placemaking Bangladesh Network. He describes himself as a spirited designer mixing technology with architecture. He envisions fusing post-human intelligence with design process and practices. To him, architecture isn't just where art meets science, it's where science crafts beauty. In this episode, we talked about Placemaking Bangladesh Network, the challenges and opportunities there, the experience of living in one of the densest places in the world, and his passion for AI and computational design research and more.
Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I am Azban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I am bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hello Asif, thank you so much for joining me. How are you and how's your life going?
Well, going through a master's program and being at the last semester, it's always stressful. So that part is like really bugging me out at this point. But other than that, like life here is kind of slow, which is a lot different from where I'm from. So I enjoy that part. In general, I would say like it's a slow life, it's a good life, but at the same time, master's is keeping me busy.
Right. And is there any, what are the stark differences between the both countries? Of course, there will be, but I was just trying to ask that.
Well, like two things in general stand out for me a lot. First one is, of course, the density of people in Southeast Asia, probably in all three countries like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. You will see a lot of people like no matter wherever you go. Here, because I'm in the southwest part of Arizona, other than California, like these states in general are not populated like at all. So when I move around or drive my car, I don't see a lot of people, which is like really, really different from how I grew up, because that almost never happened. And the other thing is, Dhaka is like it gets a lot of rain. It's humid. It's green. Arizona is technically a desert, so it has some sort of green, but it's kind of brownish green, and at the same time, things are rocky, a bit rough. There's a different kind of biodiversity here. So these are pretty different. I mean, these are like almost 180-degree opposite from where I'm from. And the only one thing that is actually common is like how people behave in certain ways. Like people from the south of the states are kind of friendly, just like the people from our places.
Yes, and I think that's a good part if people are good and welcoming.
Yeah, so there's this term called Southern hospitality. They always have time to like say hi to you. They have time to listen to the stories you want to tell. People will come and talk to you on public transports. And I went to New York like last year. It doesn't happen there a lot, but here, like it's pretty common.
Yeah, this is how actually the culture and lifestyles are defined in the places, different places, every place has its own
Mhm.
vibe. So cool. That's cool. Okay. Okay, so let's begin with the question answers from you. I want to know, first of all, how did you find your passion for public spaces and placemaking?
Um, well, it has some background story to it. So I, all my like academic life, I was in Dhaka when I was in Bangladesh, and I wasn't born there. I was born in a small city, grew up like for a decade there, then moved to the capital. And in a small city, you will always have access to playgrounds. You will have access to public spaces, formal or informal. But when you move to a more dense city, you kind of start to miss those spaces. Like I didn't have a lot of access to playgrounds where friendship is made and social connections are born. And at the same time, the parks sometimes they're so formal and so big because of the scale of the city. You kind of get lost into it, and the social connections that makes a space into a place doesn't actually happen. So while when I grew up and started going to universities, I tried to like replicate the life I had back home. And that kind of got me into the idea that people should have access to different scales of public spaces. no matter where they live. And that actually like became one of the things I always advocated. After a while, when I got into climate activism, I realized that, like, a lot of climate activists talk about planting trees, but an isolated tree at the top of your rooftop actually doesn't make any sense if you don't have access to those things in a public space. And that's when I realized like these are not, different and scattered things. Rather, they're an unified media that we should be looking into and try to connect each dot with the other so that the environment and the life of people on a social spectrum gets better with the activities that we do.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's very comprehensive, and that's so true because we often, I often question that the plantation drive, it's good. Okay, it's fine for the environment, but if you're not utilizing it, people will not find it valuable and try to protect it in future maybe. Because
Right.
the future generations are what going to sustain it or to manage it to to keep it alive. But if they are not considering it valuable because they have no ownership or no sense of connection to it, they will not keep it. I think so. That's something that we should consider and advocate for. And it's so true. Such a uh, experiential sort of connection and learning, and how you have come to it. Very sweet. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Mhm.
Okay, so now I want to ask that which city are you from, and about your placemaking initiative there.
So, like, which city am I from can be a bit complicated. Right now I'm in Tucson, Arizona, which is on the southern part of the United States. I grew up most of my adult years in Dhaka, and of course I'm from Rajbari, which is like a small town in Bangladesh. So I kind of carry like memories from all three cities. Uh, but if you want me to pick one, I would probably pick Dhaka because I spent most of my life there, and of course grew the sense of activism by looking at the problems we have over there. In Dhaka, the idea of placemaking is still like probably solely based on the idea of participatory design. There are certain firms who do like informal settlement design, so they go to these spaces and try to make life better for people through design. But that's not what placemaking as a framework is in general. So the idea of placemaking as an umbrella is kind of non-existent there. Placemaking Bangladesh is at this point like 2 years old formally after we got registered. So we're still like at that phase when we are still deciding which would be the best course of action for us. And we're trying to identify like the unique patterns that we have over there in Dhaka. We're also engaged in some academic researches. After that, probably we'll be able to get somewhere where we can find out which would be most impactful in terms of doing these things. But there are certain initiatives. For example, there have been participatory schools for less fortunate children in every single locality. And these places are not institutionalized. They're born from the idea of a locality where people realize that they need to have a space where children can get basic education, and the less fortunate often do not have access to schools. So eventually, what happens, people go there with their children, they spend a lot of time, and it becomes like kind of a place rather than being just a school. So that's there. The idea of placemaking sometimes is pretty organic. And I see like a lot of things popping up there in these aspects. We worked a bit with the tea stalls in Dhaka. So we call tea stalls as like micro scale public spaces. They have kind of the same characteristics, and we are trying to build a network of these spaces so that citywide it kind of becomes a movement without being like a formal movement. Rather, it becomes something spontaneous people respond to.
That's such a cool idea. I mean, yes, we are going to talk about the Tong culture in the next few questions, but that's a good way to think that you are trying to build a network around this. And, because this is something that people value in your country, in our country as well. So that's very cool. And Yes, I actually wanted to know about Dhaka, so I'm glad that you shared about that. Okay, so have you been doing any community events? And if yes, then how was the response of people to it?
So we actually, when we were much more younger, and placemaking Bangladesh was not a formal thing, we did like a lot of public events. That actually gave us the idea that this should be something. And when I got introduced to placemaking X, I realized that this is where this should be going. So what we did was we tried to have like public conversation with young adults regarding the things that they want to discuss about. And in this era, when screen actually determines like how your leisure time would be, it's pretty hard to get people out of their homes, get people out of restaurants, and actually make public spaces. I mean, public spaces, if you look at it from an urban designer or an architect's perspective, probably they will say like a park is a public space or a plaza is a public space. But none of them become a public space unless people are actually there. Like in COVID, people were isolated and there was no public space, even though all of these spaces were there. For young adults, particularly, this becomes an issue. Like when they're with their screens, they don't go to play. But if they don't want to play, you cannot actually provide them with like playing fields and expect them to be social and public spaces. So we wanted to know like what they want to talk about in general. There were events like Comic Con, there were events like pop culture concerts. So people actually would go there, and we would go and talk to people regarding what they want to talk about, what they want to learn, what they want to share with each other. And we tried to have like smaller discussions in our university campus based on these things. So they were like small gatherings, pretty spontaneous. People would come and talk about certain topic that they're passionate about. There was no obligation to be there, but some people just chose to be there. And then there are social and religious dimension to these. For example, in the month of Ramadan, people gather actually to have iftar outside of their homes, like for at least 10 days of that month. So we tried to explore like how that can flourish social spaces in the spaces that we already know. And it worked because people actually wanted to go to these events. People wanted to talk about certain things. Even we had reunions of people who haven't met for 10 years. So we realized that this people to people dimension, even though we have a lot of people, often doesn't happen. So placemaking in times of dense countries probably should be focused on these things. And after the formation of Placemaking Bangladesh, we haven't done actually any formal events, but we kept on like being catalyst of these informal things. And there was an attempt to make these like unified with one another, but for many reasons, like technical, sometimes bureaucratic, sometimes properly monetary, that actually didn't happen.
Okay, so these lessons are actually valuable and insightful. And of course, these things take time. The building trust with other people takes time. And
Mhm.
I'm very, I'm moved and inspired by your observations and what you have your findings basically. And it is good to know that there are a lot of dimensions, and how we Asian people think about meeting people and about our festivals, and yes, Ramadan. That's the exact same thing because it's around the corner. And I was thinking that how people meet outside for iftars, even dastakhans are there for the poor people. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of things that we are relating to, and this is so amazing to know. I get lost in my own thoughts because of you what you are saying. I have seen it there here as well. So
Mhm.
it's amazing to talk to Indians and to Bangladesh people especially. uh
Yeah.
so awesome. Okay, one more thing, like you are saying that there are schools about that are participatory schools.
Mhm.
What's their strategy or how they gather people? Do you want to talk about that?
So yeah, so my house, like my father's house, was in Mohammadpur. It's a locality in Dhaka. It's one of the densest and oldest localities in Bangladesh. So they have this locality started with like having multiple types of people. Like there are Bangla speaking people. There are some Urdu speaking people there as well. But at the same time, to serve these like almost middle or upper middle class people, there's a marginal group of people that live near the area who are basically rickshaw pullers, garments workers, and also sometimes like they work on lighter industries. And these people, they live in even denser context. So even though like a lot of education reform has gone successfully in Bangladesh, there are like people being born every day or being migrated to the city every day who doesn't have access to like government educational institutions. And sometimes it happens in a way that the government system, it has its own structure. So you need to send your kids to school when they're like 4, 5, or 6. But at times there are kids who are like 10 and haven't gone to school because of their family's financial restrictions. So the aim is to give these people a chance towards basic education, to make them familiarized with uh, basic ideas of language education, mathematics, and stuff like those. So the people who basically arrange these things, they go to the locality and say, see, if you have an open space or a shed in a market that is not being used in a certain day, probably we can occupy that space, take a blackboard or a whiteboard there. And if you bring your kids there, there will be people who will be teaching your kids these things. uh, Fascinating story is, in these kinds of households, the father is usually the sole earner and the moms, they're usually housewives, or sometimes they work for other households to have some extra income. But they're pretty passionate about like educating their children, or at least like give them basic idea about how literacy works. So they were the ones who kind of like brought their children there or sometimes they sat through that whole session if they had time, or if they didn't have it, at least they would drop their children there. And it kind of flourishes. It's easier to work with children because if you get to motivate them, if you get to make them happy with some sort of incentive, it can be just good time. They will be there, and the mothers on the outskirt will kind of transform the whole place into like and the space into a place which was a dead space to begin with, but just because of some voluntary intervention and some inspired story from these mothers, they kind of become a like place. And you will probably not call a school as a social space if we look at it from an architectural or urban design perspective, but I have seen like pretty limited number of space which are as successful as these ones, like as public spaces.
Yes, this is so cool, and I'm so inspired by how people make a team first or make an agenda and then ask to to revive a land for a purpose. And this is so cool, and this is an effective use of a place, and very inspiring stories come out of it as well. So loving it. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's talk about the Tong culture, and as our country share this experience, and we love celebrating it with the chai. So let's talk about that because Tong is the new word for us. Tell us more about it.
So the idea of tong is kind of everywhere, but the word tong is urbanized. I mean, when we went to university for higher education, we became like accustomed to this word. I mean, yeah, we even when we were younger, like would go to tea stalls, would like have a cup of tea or meet our friends there, and that ignites a new degree of like social interaction. For example, you meet your friends at school, but you are probably a bit more formal there because of the environment. But when you go to the tea stall, there's no degree of formality. So probably like you will meet your friends in the evening there if you don't have access to playing fields or if you're not into playing games in general. But as you grow up, as you age up, everything else kind of goes away from your life. If you come out of the school, you don't go to get to the school again. If you grow out the age when you go to the field to play, you kind of get out of that. But this tea thing, it keeps on like happening throughout your life. If you are a student, cool, you can get to be there and you spend a lot of hours there. If you are in a professional field, the hours get reduced, but the first opportunity you get, like at the break of your office, you hit the tea stall again. And in the evening, if you have time after coming back to your own locality, you will again hit the tea stall, like for a casual chat with the local people. And it so happens that there are different age groups on a tea stall that interacts differently. For example, I'll probably meet my dad at times, like if I go to the tea stall, and both of us, like being common on a social circle, that almost never happens in any other space because of the striking age difference, the generational gap that we have. And me here is an example, but it's true for every single, probably South Asian, I would say. And in Bangladesh, in recent years, the rent of spaces have gone really high. So people actually cannot afford to like build tea stalls in every corner. You will see a lot of like tea vendors. They just have a flask with certain degree of like amenities with them. They have biscuits. They have like dry snacks and tea, but they're pretty mobile. Even when they're sitting on a bus stoppage selling some cup of tea, you will see that social interaction keeps on happening all around them. So these flasks, even though they don't have any structure or infrastructure built into them, they kind of work as catalyst of mobile public spaces. And these gave us two ideas: that you need to have like a bench for people to sit down and access to food. And probably these two things can like ignite the formation of a public space from out of nowhere. And we spend a lot of money these days because of the economic boom Bangladesh is going through. We are like reforming parks, we are doing city scale landscaping, and like over the top projects throughout the country, which are pretty successful and pretty nice to look at. But in terms of success, I would always vote for the tea stall that only has a flask and no budget at all.
Yes, and that's such a sweet story. And the way you put it, because we consider these ordinary things as something ordinary, and we take for granted basically. But exactly this is how things happen. And it's not just, let's say, it's not just about tea stalls, maybe, but of course, if we are talking about the public space, it's about the tea stall. But it's the tea culture, that we are anywhere, we are just sitting around it. Because I remember that first time we did our placemaking event, it was in a campus, and
Mhm,
we had a tea stall nearby. So the guy
mhm,
used to come from that tea stall to our place, and as a team he used to serve us. And I remember that he was there in our social gathering, and how
mhm,
he used to bring that tea, and everyone would be staring at him that where is he going? So it was such a happening thing because it was food around which the social gathering was happening. And
mhm.
I love to hear that you and your father would meet each other at a tea stall. And it's such a sweet, memory, and pleasing sight if a third person is there. Like,
Well, probably we won't be talking to each other, but we would definitely like discover that he is there, and probably I would like hide from him. But that's also a degree of social interaction that doesn't happen at your home. So,
yes.
I mean, I would actually like celebrate that as a new degree of social interaction and a degree only a social and public space can offer.
Yeah, I think if you just get to know that I was there, your father would say that I was there just 10 minutes before you were there. Just to
Right,
talk.
right,
That would also be a great memory, sort of
right.
different sort of interaction between the two people. Awesome. This
Mhm,
is this is sweet. Okay, so वैसे you have inspired me to find the tea stalls and to map them and to see how amazing things are happening there. It's such a interesting story to look at. Thank you so much.
mhm.
Let's see how it goes. Okay, what are the pros and cons of living in one of the densest places in the world? I'm sure there must be inspiring stories that you would like to share.
So, like in Dhaka, probably I have already told you, like it happens all the time that people are gathering in a public transport and they're almost being bound to talk to each other, and sometimes that leads to good things. But at the same time, there are challenges. For example, it's Dhaka is not the safest city for like all genders. I mean, particularly for women-centric placemaking. We haven't like made much of a progress after like even after being independent for 50 years. And as the same goes for children. Like it's not safe for them to move around like throughout the day, which it should be, and they should have like some walkable infrastructure, at least on the neighborhood scale, so that they can go from home to school and school to home like rather safely. But these are we see these as scopes to improve the city as we move forward, because there are a lot of projects happening throughout the country, especially on the capital city. I mean, Dhaka for last 15 years or so is going through a major renovation. Sometimes it caused a lot of inconvenience, but now certain projects are opening up and people are celebrating new degree of like urbanism in the country. But those degrees are solely like mechanical project or civil project dependent. I mean, we are still not enjoying the fact that we're opening towards new options of having new scale of public spaces. So that's something we should be working towards, and that has something that we should be inspired from. But still, there are problems like disguised as opportunities. I would actually draw attention to another thing in Bangladesh that is happening for a couple of years now, or more than a couple of years. That's we have a huge refugee crisis at the southern part of our country, and that thing is actually more dense than any locality of Dhaka. So they have like 1.2 million people living in like a small chunk of land, and the growth is pretty organic. So they're still like pretty worried about providing food, shelter, treatment, clothes, these basic rights to these people. And we're actually kind of like in an offset when it comes to the idea that they need to have access to their own public spaces as well. Because the space is like so limited, it's almost impossible to provide them with like a playing field or a park or spaces like these. And these people are solely dependent on like the organic type of public spaces, like a tea stall or a participatory school that we talked about. And the access has been restricted for the whole time that they're here. So it's not always possible to provide them with civil facilities, infrastructural facilities to like amplify these spaces like we can do in Dhaka. So this is some degree of difficulty that probably all the refugees throughout the world kind of are going through. And Bangladesh is just an example. And refugee crisis is something that is not new in Bangladesh. After our independence, like there were people who wanted to go back to their own places after the war happened, but they couldn't. So they kind of had to stay back as refugees and live in a confined space. And after 50 years, a lot of families, like throughout 3 generations probably, they're still into those spaces. I mean, they come out for work, they go back there, they grow their camp like on a vertical basis at this point because horizontal space isn't there anymore. And the city, even though like it was far from it back in 1971, it kind of caught up to these people. And they don't have access to any kind of public spaces. So these camps, like they became hotspot for crimes. And we are like suffering from the fact that we are struggling to provide them with basic facilities like air or wind, because the like locality is so dense at this point. So public space, even though it's a basic right for these people and is essential for their future generations to grow as proper human beings, we are still not there when we can provide them with these. And that's one case study. But when we look at the newer camps, we can see the same thing like repeating again, over and over again, like through generations, because these people are still coming and our country is kind of sheltering them as much as they can. But sheltering them is one thing, and providing them with facilities that has like all these dimensions integrated into it, it's a whole different type of challenge. If you want to talk about stories, I mean, yeah, the young architects who are like working in there, uh, ensuring all these things. They're facing like a lot of difficulties, but they're coming out with successful projects, which I think would be like a pretty good example. I know someone called Asif Hasan. He has built like a magnificent school in the heart of the Rohingya refugee camp right now. Uh, I and the 2 other co-founders of Placemaking Bangladesh, Sadia Tasnim and Nazifat Abbasum, we actually had like opportunities to work with them, at least on a theoretical basis for a while. We exchanged ideas and wanted to know like how this can be solved. We're still on a phase like where we're working on algorithmic basis to solve these things, but it's hard and will probably take more time as we go forward too. Because looking at people just as numbers is easy, and you can develop algorithms pretty easily. But when you are from Dhaka and you know the challenges of living in a dense area, it's actually hard to implement those things on a real life scale.
Yes, and there's no doubt in that. Um, okay, so you have given such a comprehensive answer again. There are two questions that relates to your answer, so let's do them first. And I want to ask that you have mentioned few great points, which are opportunities, like there are problems as well as opportunities for you to work on. So are there any other points that you would like to add or revise in the questions which
Uh,
is asked by I ask all people, what are the challenges and opportunities you find in public spaces in your country in Bangladesh for you?
So probably to answer that, I'll need to focus on the fact that I am out of Bangladesh at this point, and I'm looking at new types of public spaces here in North America. But funny thing is, the same type of problems exist here as well. I'm pretty close to the US Mexico border, so the migration problem, the forced immigration problem is still like pretty evident here as well. And Arizona has a homeless problem, and these people need to have access to public spaces as well. In New York, like at this point, Hotel Roosevelt is kind of flooded with all these people, and they're still struggling to provide them with the basic things. So even though the location changes, the degree of problem changes, the problems itself kind of remains the same. And we actually need like a global movement or a connected movement that actually addresses these problems. I mean, look at the refugee problem anywhere in the world where a conflict is happening, and the people are bound to be like uprooted from where they are. We can provide them with like pretty quantitative things, like everyone needs food, shelter, and clothes. We recognize that, and we try our best to provide them with these things. But growing up as a human being, public space is not marked as a basic right of people. And if you are from the northern part of Mexico trying to have a better life and you get into the US, you still need to have access to public spaces because you have kids. You yourself need to have like access to mental health agendas, which are pretty closely related to public health spaces. Bangladesh or South Asia in general, we don't even always recognize that mental health is something that is pretty important while growing up in a city. We go to the cities to have access to better financial and infrastructural amenities. We want to go to good schools. We want to have access to better jobs with better payments. But at the sacrifice of the public spaces that we do at this point, it's not going to a right direction. So everyone at this point, I think, should sit down, talk about the problems, find like how it is common in every single context that there is. Probably not Antarctica, other than that, everywhere people lives, and try to come up with strategies that solve these things. Money sometimes for placemaking movements become a burning issue. No one is willing to invest into something abstract because we cannot actually show people this is the bridge we built for public spaces. For a flyover, it's easily demonstrable to other people as quantifiable development. Placemaking, I think, is more of an intellectual development or a social development. And even though architects, engineers, planners throughout the world are involved with this movement, we kind of get lost here in between the translation regarding how our expertise should be translated as a placemaker. Uh, the placemaking summit in Mexico last year was a good eye opener for me. We had like people from all over the world. We got to talk about the work you do in Pakistan or the work we do in Bangladesh alongside the global leaders of placemaking. So that was like a good initiative that people came together, got to sit, but we need to do it more and probably more frequently than an yearly basis.
Yes, that's cool. And that's a good idea actually that we need to talk about these things, these issues on a global level. And it's not just okay, so having one focus on creating accessible public spaces for the displaced populace or the refugees. is one thing. You know what? Where the way I started was that even the people who are living in this city, who are citizens and who have been living through generations over here, they are not been, they haven't been given the access to the public spaces for like year or for with such freedom, and
Mhm.
for considering the point of view of the mental health, physical health as well. So these things are important and should be discussed. You are very right about that. And I would like to know that how your journeys, your journey towards this idea was initiated, about the refugees. Like, how did you come to the realization? The time
Uh,
and point in time, if you remember that.
Right. So I think it was back in 2017 when the Rohingya crisis was like igniting again. I mean, it keeps on happening for like with an interval of 10 years. It happened in 1975, it happened in 1985 again. Probably 95, it didn't happen as much, but at again like 2015, 16, 17, it kept on happening. So it's a pattern, and conflict do have pattern when if they're not resolved. But the problem, if something keeps on happening again and again and again, probably the next time we face it, we should be doing better. But we're not. The 1975 refugee camp is almost identical to the 1985 one, just older and have like higher degree of problem because they're older. But the new one, because there were so much pushback and there are so many people who came in, it kind of like caused catastrophes in our nature. We had like a reserved forest area on the southern part of the country, which completely got demolished because suddenly 1.2 million people started living there. And it became a fiasco throughout the country that like we're losing our wildlife, we're losing a lot of things that we have as resources over there, but at the same time we cannot actually turn our back towards these people because they're here not by choice, but they're being forced. So everyone was talking about these things, and we got to see some like really horrible pictures of those camps like they were staying in. uh, at the beginning phase of those camps, they don't get access to proper shelter. They live in tents, and people started asking questions like, "Where do these kids like go to school, or like where do they go for treatment, and how do we ensure that they don't have mental health issues because they're coming from a war-driven situation, which is traumatic, like from the beginning." And the way we're making them stay in a place, it's not healthy either. At the same time, there were a lot of backlash from the common people from our country because our country isn't the like most financially stable place on planet Earth. We have our own problems, and because we have a dense population of our own, people were sometimes a bit skeptic about helping others when we ourselves are like not doing the best in these regards. So as architects or like from people who make spaces, it was our duty to think about how we can address these things. One of my friends was doing her thesis regarding these things, and I got to see some original photos of the camps, like based on that. So that time, I was really like on top of my game regarding like climate activism, and I tried to incorporate these two things together. And going into global space, talking about these things, I realized that this is not a problem that we're facing alone, but we are facing the worst part of it because no other country has like 1.2 million refugees overnight on a plane. So we had to find solution to these problems, and there were a lot of aid. But once again, aid is quantitative. Aid comes as the form of money. Aid comes as food or, I mean, equipment to build your homes. But they don't come as intellectual properties. And we ourselves were the people who were left to think about these things. Coming to Arizona, this is like a global warming hotspot. I realized that if this happens over there, those people are doomed, like forever. And there is no way we are equipped to save all these people. So if you tie one problem with the other, probably it will ignite new thoughts into you. Sometimes the thoughts are scary, but you cannot run away from the problems. You will have to be the one who initiate and do something, at least like on a very minimum scale to solve them. If you can do anything, probably you should talk about the problem more so that there are other people who gets into the loop and you can build a movement in the end of it.
Yes. While you were telling about it, and um, I was just feeling that maybe just because you have seen it, from a shorter distance, let's say that, like you have seen it or you have known it by yourself, you must be able to relate to the Palestine situation, I think, because being, Muslim countries, we have a different association with those people and the situation that's happening because I don't know what the future will go, where the refugees will go.
Mhm.
Um, but there's no words, for all of this happening. And it's we need to talk about things, but it came to surface in this crisis or in this war situation in the Palestine.
Mhm.
Like, there has been a lot of talk about Syria, Lebanon before, and Rohingya as well. And then in China side, there are, you know, things happening, but
Mhm.
we haven't been talking about these things so much. But now people are talking about it. And
Yeah.
I do believe, I do hope that these things minimize and we try to, you know, one part is definitely making things better for them, but also trying to minimize these things so the situation doesn't arise, you know? Uh,
Uh, yeah. True.
right? So, yeah. Okay. I would like to know that what are your observations or factors you have identified that why heritage, culture, and social life are disappearing in Bangladesh? As you mentioned
Uh,
yourself.
a lot of these probably are related to the spaces or public space things that we already talked about, because to practice what you have in your culture is it is essential that you share your thoughts with other people, and you need spaces to share your thoughts. So tea stall is like one degree of it, but it doesn't end there. You have to scale up. Like, how many people can you talk on a tea stall? Probably five on a single day. But there are things you need to talk with 100 people. Before, like 50 years before, when our culture wasn't this urbanized, there were rural like get together spaces like weekly hearts, or even courtyards of your own home. So after you're done with your work, you have some time to talk about these things. You have time to grow social bonding. You have time to like go visit your relatives, even though telecommunication wasn't this strong. So there was this degree of like people being together physically, or like talking to each other whenever they needed, or even when they don't need it. But now we're so urbanized that like 24 hours of our day are kind of pre-calculated, so organized interactions never usually happen. And traditions, they don't get passed along, because my father, he grew up in a rural area, so the culture I just talked about is his culture. I grew up in a completely different context, so my one is like a crampy apartment. I had to go to tea stall to just have access to people. And for my father, the tea stall thing was just the like first degree of it. He could go to the field, he could go to the hut, he could go to a marriage ceremony of other people around his village if he wanted to meet more people. So these don't usually happen. We are so pre-calculated that even when I'm going into a marriage ceremony, probably I'll need to know it 7 days before. Otherwise, I won't be able to attend. My schedule is that busy. And even after nightfall, like we have restaurants to meet like with a selected group of people, that we choose to be involved with. So culture can get lost because we are losing connections in number. We're kind of being confined into our smaller networks, and probably our next generation who had access to technological advancement from like really young age, they will be a bit more detached. But at the same time, you cannot actually take away the technology from them. I mean, I'm a big advocate of like doing being into as much as technology as you can, but in a proper way, in a right way. So the things you do, for example, the songs in Bangladesh, or the like performance arts in Bangladesh, or the events that we celebrated, like the first of Boishak, they were not actually festivities that were marked on our calendar. These were things that came from our lifestyle. what was Poila Boishakh to begin with? It's the end of spring. It's the end of like spring season and beginning of the next summer. So these were marked by how we cultivate our rices, how we harvest them, how we get together at the end of the season to like go to our relatives' homes. So these things will not be back on an instance. But the way we are celebrating it now, if we can find the linkage towards our heritage things, probably they will be back to some extent, at least on a lifestyle basis. The other thing about heritage is like the physical elements of it, like the old buildings, the old part of the cities, the old shops that you go to for a certain type of sweet. They are being lost just because we are not aware about their value. Coming to the West, now I get to see like these people celebrate pretty small things which won't be deemed significant in our society. Like they're celebrating a tea shop that's only 25 years old. In our countries, like 25 years old is almost nothing, but it's part of their heritage at this point. And we have hundreds of years of old like buildings, infrastructure, but we don't know that they're valuable. The government need to pass a law to declare those as heritage building, and even so we don't value them. We go on like break those down, build real estates. But the new buildings or the new urban development, they have like all these amenities like air conditioning, sensor based lighting and whatnot, but they don't offer us a lot to interact with the people that live just beside you, which wasn't common like back in the time of our dads or our granddads. So I think these are the reasons that culture is getting lost. If we get back to the degree of public spaces access that we had before, some part of it will be back. The other part needs to have awareness and adaptation because culture keeps on changing. It will never be the same, but we probably should try to keep the best parts with ourselves as we move forward.
Agreed. Okay, so while you said that our lives is so scheduled that we need to know, we need to know prior to our commitment that we are available and we are going somewhere. So right, because I was having a discussion once with my advisor, and we were discussing that children are not playing outside, children don't come outside, and he just asked me that, do you think your children have the time to go out because of their schedules and their how their days are scheduled on the base of studies, like
Mhm.
they are told like to get more numbers, but they are not never asked to get more into play in public spaces especially. So yes, exactly, this is how cultures are changing, because we used to play outside. It was part of our day, it was part of our routine, because we knew that it's important. But now in my country especially, what I see is that our children are more supposed to bring good grades than being good at play, or just play, not just like bring some trophy or something, just play. It's good for your development, your character, your character building, and then for your own health as well. So if we are not thinking on these dimensions, then we are not going to build playgrounds or the parks.
Right.
So the parks I see, they are abandoned and they are not taken care of well.
Mhm.
So I think yes, these factors count. It's the right identification of things and about the buildings as well. So looking forward to a lot of things from your side, because your findings are very amazing. Okay, so lastly, shed some light on your vision of using post-human intelligence with design process and practices, and how do you think it will benefit the placemaking movement? Is it
So my graduate level research is pretty tech driven. Like I try to explore like how all these new AI technologies will change how we look at spaces and how we design these spaces. But that's something probably people don't see as a public space research. I do see it that way because you see algorithms and AI tools, they're one thing, but how we utilize them is another thing altogether. Posthumanism is an idea where we see ourselves as an element of nature rather than looking at ourselves as the center of it. How we have developed our cities are completely based on how we want to see them. if we want a road, then we build them, no matter who was living on the road or what kind of organism was there before we were there. So if we talk about Earth as a single organism, we are the invading species that is making things worse every single day. But now we are in such a critical moment that we cannot be this entitled like while designing anything. And if we get to do that, the public spaces that we crave so much about will be born like automatically. Imagine leaving some spaces for water, or imagine like designing in your cities in a way where air can move through. These are non-human elements, but you are not considering them as the core focus of the city right now. But if you are into post-humanism and if you think about it, you will be doing this from now on. AI itself like is a form of intelligence that takes part in your design process. So that's a non-human element as well. For all our civilization, we are the only ones who think that we have the intelligence to like design certain things. This is the first time in history we're being challenged. Something else has the capacity to design things, and it's not bound to think like ourselves. Of course, it has some degrees of training built into it, but the way it is thinking at this point is kind of like us, but not exactly the same of us. And of course, in the future, it will probably not see us as the sole center of the universe as we do at this point. So that opens possibilities. I mean, we can get to better public spaces if AI assists us design those things. You talked a bit about pattern finding. We human beings are not good with pattern findings in general because we see what we want to see. We try to emphasize on the thing that we ourselves are passionate about. AI probably has ideas to be free from all these biases. So I'm like interested to know that how a bias-free co-pilot in terms of design or thinking can actually rationalize how we build our spaces. I mean, look at Islamabad or Chandigarh. These cities were planned by a single person. He thought from every single other person who would be living into these cities in future. None of them he knew about. And these are good architects. We read about them like in history, we read about their work, we look at how magnificent these cities are. But at the same time, someone was so like into their brain that I myself is enough to design all these things. Probably at this point, like even if you are a very good architect or an urban designer, you shouldn't be thinking that I myself know everything. I should be designing for everyone else, including non-human things like birds, uh, water, or like air. So that's the design process that I'm exploring at this point of my research. And of course, I'm pretty hopeful that for more complex situations like building a city or building a refugee camp, this will probably be valuable because we human beings haven't done a good job with this thing so far.
Interesting. Okay, so uh, one, I'm completely not a tech person, and but it's interesting in the dimension which you are thinking, and I'll keep a follow up to see how it goes. And definitely, I'll not give any. I have nothing to give from my side on this, but it was such an interesting perception of yours and the way you're thinking about things and exploring. So just I would say good luck for your work
Thank you.
and for your research, and it's very interesting, amazing. Okay, so it was amazing so far. Let's talk about uh, the questions, rapid fire questions that I ask everyone, and see how it goes. Okay, so what drives you and what keeps you focused on the work you do?
Uh, just to like elevate the quality of life that we have in Bangladesh, because there are people from different kind of financial backgrounds, but none of them enjoy living in Dhaka, like at all. Everyone has complaints. And as architects, like we should be providing spaces to the people what they enjoy, right? That's the whole definition of the profession that I'm in. But just by being an architect who draw section plans and elevations and the sell them as buildings, probably that's not enough to ensure that. So this idea that probably like at least 10 million people are looking towards me and people like me to provide them with a better city, and the people living outside the city who wants to be there for better opportunities, that is enough to keep yourself focused.
That's awesome. Not everybody think like that, and I pray that you succeed in the best of ways. So good luck. Any proud moment or best memories or memory of yours from your work life?
So, just before coming to the States, like I was invited to the Republic of Korea by Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, and he has his own youth envoy regarding climate change situations. So the things that we talked about here, I got to talk these exact things with him regarding these things. He was like, I mean, he's at this point like retired, and he should be like taking rest after that hectic work life that he had. But he is so passionate and he is so knowledgeable about every single region that he was talking to me regarding like how having so much population actually can be a blessing for like all the countries in the Southeast Asia. And we, if we get to play our cards right with these people, how we can use these as a leverage to like have better spaces for ourselves. But at the same time, the political structure in our region is like pretty rigid. I mean, we have three countries who are never almost in good terms with each other. But if we work like the European Union, where the border is flexible, people get to travel and people get to know from each other, and people actually are in good terms, where like the resources of all the countries in the region are distributed in a way that it can be ensured to make sure to ensure that people are having better lives. I mean, we have so many possibilities. Like you're working in Pakistan, I know Niharika who is working in Nepal, and there is a Bhutanese placemaking movement at this point. India has this huge network at this moment, and they even work in regions. They were attend events, but we all share the same kind of problems, and we are thinking in different brackets to solve these problems. So based on the discussion I had with him, like there are so many things that we can do, and that's one proud moment that I like, and I feel very good about because I got to talk about these things with him, and he resonated regarding the thoughts that I have.
Nice. That's a good memory and a learning experience as well, definitely. Okay,
Mhm.
so any struggling or hardest moment of your work life?
If I go ahead and talk about placemaking, like there are so many hurdles. For example, like anything you want to do with people, you have to earn their trust. And Dhaka is not a trusting city. People don't trust each other pretty easily because we have this hectic life every single day. People are usually like at the edge of their mind, like 24/7. So if you go on and talk to people, like you need to send your kid to that specific school so that we can have a good space and he can have access to education, it's pretty hard to convince them. And also, there are backlashes from people who will be hurt from this type of work. So it never makes things easy. And the bureaucracy of our like post-colonial Southeast Asian era, I think I don't know about how things are in Pakistan, but at least in India or Bangladesh, like if you want to get anything done by a government agency, the pushback is like about a year. And for a very small project, if you get a pushback about a year, sometimes your project will not be relevant after a year. So a lot of good ideas gets lost in these, but we try our best to like do small scale intervention and try to win people back to our side so that we can actually get things done even without going through these bureaucracies. So yeah, that's the like biggest challenge I would always talk about, probably throughout my life.
Okay, so I've been holding my laughter throughout. I was trying to hide my smile, and the reason is because it's quite relatable. These are the exact same issues we have here as well, and even more so because what I saw is that um, our nations are traumatized because of the war situation and because of the independence and the movements. So, and it has been passed on in the generations. So our nervous systems are hacked. We are not able to focus on things, and just because we are not able to focus on the joy, we are never asking for it or we are not designing it. So
Right.
yes, this is something that I
That,
was
that,
able
that
to
that's
traumatized.
that's actually a pretty good way of looking at it. Like we're not asking for joy. That's why we're not being able to design this. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we do ask for conflict and defensive mechanism a lot.
Exactly, because this was my major finding, and it was something that I identified in myself as well. And I was pretty much, I went in a depth of it and tried to heal my nervous system to at least experience joy myself and to see how it goes. So now I can talk to people from this place that okay, let's take them through it and see how it goes. So yeah, let's see how it goes.
Mhm.
Okay, any placemaking mantra or quote that you love?
Probably to like for placemakers, like we try to find a playbook that works in every single context. So I can give you a good example. Like Fred Kent, one of the core founders of Placemaking X, had like his own quote that you should put a bench on every corner to make a space into a place. So we try to look at these quotes and we feel like we should be doing exactly that in our country so that we can have our own spaces. But in your country, in your urban fabric, in your societies, you already have your bench. Like for me, the finding of a tea stall, it's nothing more than a bench. It is a bench. So you have your own version of bench, like already built into it because your people or my people, they were social from the beginning. Every single people are social being. So they already have done it. And we're not reinventing the wheel. We're basically trying to get back in time and try to find out what our lost shreds are. So that's my mantra or ideology regarding placemaking, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel or let people know what placemaking quote unquote is in terms of words, because they probably know the same thing or have the same idea but by a different name. It's our responsibility to find that thing out and amplify that through our work. Sometimes you don't even have to build anything to facilitate those things. Probably you need to take people to certain places, play a role to change their habit in a way. And you will see public spaces will flourish here and there. There won't be like big parks or infrastructural projects. That's the government responsibility. Your responsibility is to have it on the neighborhood scale. Probably like that's how I see success in this domain.
This is awesome. This is actually the right thing which you said because we do, it's the right thing. I think I will not comment on this because it's complete in its own. Great. Okay, so do you have anything to say about placemaking in Pakistan or Pakistan in general?
I mean, I would definitely love to know like how the context of Karachi or Islamabad differs from each other because they are so different as types of cities. In Bangladesh, we have a lot of cities like Karachi, which are like old and having its own infrastructural problems and having the similar set of problems. In a planned setup like Chandigarh or Islamabad, it can be very different. So I would be definitely interested to know like how this works. And the work you were doing, I was there in the placemaking summit, so I got to see a lot of it, which was pretty inspiring to be honest. And I was also part of like placemaking India's discussion regarding how similar Mumbai and Karachi are in terms of placemaking, which was fascinating. So all these degrees and domains, I see a lot of things to learn, and I'll be interested to know more like what you are doing, how your cities are, and how public spaces are flourishing through all these changes that we're going through right now.
Thank you so much, Asif, for your appreciation about the work that we are doing in Pakistan. Then it's just nothing for me now because there's a lot to be done, and looking forward to doing more and being able to share more with people around the world. I've noted all your points and we've walked through it, and we'll see how we can be updated about that. Okay, so is there any message that you would like to give to the placemakers that are joining in, the young placemakers?
So I would probably like end with a story. I like on the placemaking summit, I met someone from Costa Rica. So she is not an architect. She is not an urban planner. She had no idea regarding what placemaking is. She was living in Barcelona for like 10 years and she had two kids. Then her whole family had to go back to Costa Rica and her husband started working there. So suddenly she realized that the two kids she had before, they had access to like pretty good quality public spaces because Barcelona is famous for that kind of spaces. In Costa Rica, the neighborhood they were in, they didn't have that. And she kind of freaked out, just like by realizing that her children probably like won't grow like in a way that she expected them to grow as a social beings. So what she did, she went to the municipality. She collected like maps regarding where certain parks should be, and she realized that the park kind of became a dump yard. So what she started doing is she herself, all by herself, like started cleaning up the mess. And at one point, when people saw her doing that, they kind of joined in. Uh, and when they cleaned up the whole spaces, they themselves like planted a layer of grass over there, and then they invited old people of the neighborhood to be there to play with the kids of the neighborhood, because there were a lot of isolated old people and there were kids. Just by combining them, they created a very like happy environment over there. Eventually people started coming in more, they started like drawing murals, and at one point municipality got the notice of it, so they hired an architect, and the architect came up with a participatory design to make it like a work. And eventually placemaking X got to know about this woman. She became like part of the network. She eventually established placemaking Costa Rica as it is now. So she's from a very different background, and she shouldn't have ideas regarding placemaking. I mean, when we talk about placemaking, it seems like it's a movement that should be led by architects, it should be led by urban designers, it should be at least led by like city officials who have ideas regarding what they're doing. But this story kind of proved in front of my eyes that you don't have to be any of those. You just need to be a responsible citizen who cares about other people and want to provide them with better spaces. I'm telling this story because anyone who is trying to get into the placemaking realm uh, probably might feel overwhelmed by looking at the scale of problems or looking at the complexity of the factors that we deal with while solving these problems. But it just has to start somewhere. You don't have to build anything, you don't have to do anything substantial, or you need a lot of people to be in, like on the same wavelength. You have to start, you have to take steps, and you have to push the mountain that is in front of you. Because if you start pushing, at one point, even if you are not able to move it, there will be other people who will be pushing on your side. And probably in the end, you can be hopeful that it will move at least by an inch if you try hard enough.
That's such a sweet story. And yes, exactly. This is how all of us are doing things and making things happen, and have been doing it, will be doing it. Awesome. Okay, I would like to know her name as well, if you don't remember it. You can tell me
I'm like,
later.
her name is on top of my head, but yeah, I'll
Yeah,
definitely
you
send you.
yeah, I would like to know that. Okay. Thank you so much, Asif. Thank you so much for your time. It was an insightful conversation, and I loved every bit of it. Thank you so much. Let's stay connected and have so much to learn in the future as well.
Thank you for having me. I mean, this is a lot of fun for me. This was a lot of fun for me as well. And well, like after the placemaking summit, I don't remember an opportunity where I got to talk so much about placemaking with someone like on one go.
Yeah, it was amazing time, and I get to know you personally. We get in touch through that. So thank you
Mhm.
so much, and thank you so much for playing your part in playing my presentation over there. You were you were the
Of
one
course,
who
of
did so.
course.
Thank you so much.
So,
And yeah,
well, yeah, and everyone who is like listening to us, placemaking Asia is something that we're trying to form. South Asia is something which are trying to form as well, because we have unique context, unique set of problems. So anyone from Asia who is listening to this, probably like if you want to work with us, if you have ideas that you want to share, reach out to any of us. We will be open to hear your stories, the things that you're doing, or the ideas you have.
definitely, definitely. Yes. And we are ourselves trying to realize this power that we have. Yes. So it's amazing. And let's see how it goes, because I'm excited on this particular journey as well. Thank you so much, and take care of yourself. Bye bye.
Yeah, yeah, sure.